Starting a new certification can feel a little like walking into a building you have never visited before and being told the exam is somewhere inside. Just follow the signs. The good news is that the GIAC Certified in Cybersecurity Controls (GCCC) exam has a clear shape, and you can learn that shape before you ever worry about memorizing details. When you understand what the exam is trying to measure, you stop studying like you are guessing and start studying like you are preparing. That is what this episode is about, turning the exam into something predictable. By the end, you should be able to describe what the exam covers at a high level, how it scores you, how to pace yourself, and why that 71% passing line changes how you approach every question. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Think of a blueprint as the exam's map, not its secret answers. A blueprint tells you what areas are on the test and how the test wants to see your knowledge organized. Instead of treating cybersecurity as one big pile of facts, a blueprint breaks the pile into domains, which are simply buckets of related skills and concepts. Domains help you avoid two common beginner mistakes: overstudying your favorite topics and understudying the topics you find boring or intimidating. When you see the domains, you can plan time and attention with intention rather than emotion. Another useful thing about domains is that they hint at the style of thinking you will need, because some domains are more about definitions and relationships, while others are more about applying a concept to a scenario. Now, let's make the idea of domains feel real without getting lost in trivia. A cybersecurity controls exam like this usually revolves around the logic of control frameworks, how controls are organized, how you prove controls are working, and how you keep controls working over time. That means you should expect questions that test whether you can recognize the purpose of a control, place it in the right category, and understand what good evidence looks like. You should also expect questions that test the vocabulary of governance, like ownership, accountability, metrics, and reporting, because controls are not just technical settings. They are a way of running security as a repeatable system. If you hold on to that big picture, the domains stop feeling like separate chapters and start feeling like different angles on the same story. Scoring is the next part of the blueprint that beginners often misunderstand. People hear that an exam is scored and assume it works like a classroom test where every question is worth the same amount and every mistake hurts equally. Many certification exams do not feel like that in practice, because the scoring is tied to a passing standard, and sometimes a scaled score is used to keep results fair across different versions of the exam. What matters most for you is the behavior the scoring system rewards: consistent understanding across the blueprint. If you are strong in one area and weak in another, the exam can expose that weakness because the questions are spread across domains. A calm way to say this is that your goal is balanced competence, not perfection in a narrow slice. That brings us to the passing threshold you mentioned, 71%. It is tempting to hear that number and think you can get almost 3 out of 10 questions wrong and still be fine. So maybe you do not need to be that precise. That is a trap. 71% is not a lot of wiggle room when you consider that you do not get to choose which questions are hard, and you do not know which ones you will misread under pressure. On an exam, mistakes rarely arrive evenly spaced and polite. They cluster when you are tired, when the wording feels similar across options, or when a scenario triggers a misconception you did not realize you had. So the real demand of 71% is not that you can be wrong sometimes. It is that you must be reliably right most of the time, even when the question is trying to pull you toward a plausible distractor. A useful way to internalize that reliability requirement is to think in terms of margins. If you aim to barely clear 71% in practice, then a small drop on test day can push you below the line. If you aim to be comfortably above it in practice, you create room for stress, surprises, and a few unavoidable tough questions. That changes how you study because you stop chasing obscure facts and start reinforcing the basics until they are automatic. Automatic does not mean mindless. It means you do not have to spend extra mental energy recalling what a control category means or what a metric is supposed to accomplish. When basics are automatic, You can spend your limited exam time on interpretation, not on translation. Pacing is where the blueprint becomes a time management tool instead of just a content guide. Every exam gives you a fixed amount of time and a fixed number of questions, and that combination creates a target pace per question. Beginners often either rush because they are afraid of running out of time or crawl because they want to be perfectly certain. Both styles can fail for different reasons. Rushing increases careless errors and misreads, while crawling burns time you will desperately need later. A better mindset is to treat time as a budget you spend, not a threat you fear. You want a default pace that is steady, plus a plan for what to do when a question costs more than it should. One simple pacing principle is that not every question deserves the same amount of time. Some questions are straightforward checks of understanding, and you should answer those with confidence and move on. Other questions are interpretive and require you to compare options carefully, and those will naturally take longer. The danger is letting one confusing question steal time from several easier questions you could have answered correctly. You can protect yourself by learning to recognize when you are stuck because you lack knowledge versus when you are stuck because you are overthinking. If you lack knowledge, extra time rarely creates the missing fact. If you are overthinking, the fix is usually to return to the core concept and ask what the question is really testing. To make this practical, you need a mental process for reading questions that keeps you on pace. Start by identifying the task. Is the question asking for a definition, a best next step, a control category, evidence of effectiveness, or a governance responsibility? Then identify the constraints inside the scenario, like scope, ownership, or the difference between policy and implementation. After that, look at the answer choices and eliminate the ones that fail the task or violate the constraints. Elimination is a powerful pacing tool because it reduces the number of choices you must seriously consider. It also reduces anxiety because you are actively doing something even when you are unsure. When you practice, you are not just learning content, you are practicing that process until it feels natural. Another pacing insight is that your brain has a limited supply of sharp attention, and the exam will try to spend it. The more time you waste on confusion early, the less mental energy you have for later questions that require careful reading. That is why a steady rhythm matters. You want to find a flow where you can answer, move on, with occasional slowdowns that are intentional rather than accidental. If you do not build that rhythm ahead of time, you can still stumble into it on test day, but it is much harder. In other words, pacing is not just something you do during the exam. It is something you train during study by doing timed practice and reflecting on where your time went. Now connect pacing back to the 71% threshold. If you run out of time and leave questions unanswered, you are essentially choosing wrong answers by default. That is a fast way to sink below the passing line. If you rush and make avoidable mistakes, you are wasting questions you could have banked. The safest path is to bank as many easy and medium questions as possible and then spend your remaining time on the hard ones. This is not about gaming the test. It is about treating the exam as a performance under constraints. The blueprint tells you what knowledge is in play, and pacing tells you how to demonstrate that knowledge effectively within the time you are given. Let's talk about what the exam is likely to reward in terms of thinking, because that also affects how you pace. A controls-focused exam usually rewards clarity about intent and evidence. Intent is why a control exists and what risk it reduces. Evidence is how you prove the control is working, not just that it exists on paper. Many beginners can talk about a control in theory, but struggle when asked what you would look for to confirm it is real and effective. That is where distractor answers become dangerous, because a distractor often sounds security-ish but does not match the intent or does not produce defensible evidence. When you see that pattern, you stop being impressed by fancy words and start asking whether the choice actually solves the problem the question describes. Another common misconception is thinking that studying a blueprint means trying to predict exact questions. That usually backfires because you end up memorizing fragments instead of building understanding. A better approach is to treat the blueprint as a set of promises. The exam promises to test you on these domains, and you promise yourself to be fluent in the core ideas inside each one. Fluency means you can explain the idea in plain language, recognize it in a scenario, and distinguish it from similar ideas. For example, you do not just know that governance exists, you understand how governance differs from day-to-day operations and why metrics and reporting connect them. When you have fluency, even a question you have never seen before feels answerable because you can reason from principles. Because this is an audio-first course, it is worth noting how beginners can accidentally misprepare when they rely only on passive listening. Listening builds familiarity, and familiarity feels like knowledge, but familiarity does not always survive a multiple-choice question under time pressure. The exam demands retrieval, not recognition. Retrieval means you can pull the concept out of your mind without being prompted by a narrative flow. That is why the blueprint should shape how you practice recall. Instead of only re-listening, you should frequently pause and ask yourself to define a term, explain a relationship, or describe what evidence would prove a control is working. When you can do that out loud, you are building the kind of mental access the exam requires. Exam day flow is the final piece of the blueprint puzzle because it is where domains, scoring, and pacing become real behavior. A calm exam day flow starts before the first question. You want a simple plan for how you will begin, how you will handle difficult questions, and how you will use any review feature if it is available. The point is not to create a complicated ritual. It is to reduce the number of decisions you have to make under stress. When stress rises, decision quality often drops, and small mistakes like misreading a keyword can cost points. If you already know that you will answer what you can, flag what you cannot, and return later with a clear head, you are less likely to spiral on a single tricky item. As you move through the exam, pay attention to your own tempo. If you notice yourself reading the same sentence multiple times, that is usually a sign you are either tired or anxious. A quick reset can be as simple as slowing down for one breath and then restating the question in your own words. That small move can prevent a wrong turn caused by misinterpretation. Also, be cautious about changing answers late unless you have a clear reason tied to the concept being tested. Beginners sometimes second-guess correct answers because a distractor feels more sophisticated, but sophistication is not the goal. The goal is correctness relative to the control intent, the governance logic, and the evidence standard that the exam expects. To wrap this up, remember what decoding the blueprint really gives you. It turns the exam from a mystery into a set of constraints you can train for. Domains tell you what must be covered. Scoring rewards balanced competence. Pacing protects your score from time-based failure. And that 71% line demands consistency rather than lucky guessing. If you hold on to those ideas, your next step is not random studying. It is purposeful preparation. Build understanding across the domains. Practice retrieving concepts without prompts. And train a steady rhythm so you can show what you know. The exam is not asking you to be a perfect security engineer. It is asking you to demonstrate you understand cybersecurity controls as an organized system and can reason about them under pressure. When you respect the blueprint and plan for the threshold, you give yourself the best chance to cross that line with confidence instead of hope.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.